Hello everybody, you're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhyolite Zone for a short story and or some poetry. We catch up with Twanged and Jack Ford in the Oak Shed for a weekly album review. And we play local unsigned and or independent music. As always, you can reach out to me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, people with local arts news, MP3s they'd like to share. Don't hesitate to get in touch. You can also find us on Facebook. If you search for The Archer on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. So this week we're going to be chatting to author Matt Cost. But before we do that, we're going to head over to the Rhyolite Zone for some more flash fiction by A.B. Frank.
I ascended the creaking wooden stairs until I reached a cosy landing. The room where myself and the other guests were to be entertained was on the right-hand side, and conversation and laughter could be heard as I neared. "Is there a peg I can hang my hat and coat on in there?" I asked, pointing to the door on the left of the landing. "Oh, no." The woman hurried to block my access and redirect me to the sitting room. I swear I heard some muffled shouting from within that room, but any notion of opening the door was soon gone. I was off the landing and among the other guests before I knew it. Fine wine was served, and I was swept away in conversation. The people of this strange new city I found myself in were fascinating. All of them told colourful stories of Vileshire, some beyond the scope of possibility. "Excuse me, I must go and relieve myself, but I refuse to miss a single story while I'm gone." Everyone agreed to wait for my return, but nobody expected it to be as soon as it was. The moment I left the room, the forbidden door broke open. The guests behind me came to see what was happening. A muscular shape stepped onto the landing. It was grossly disfigured and caused the fainting of several guests. The thing before me made the stories I'd heard earlier all the more plausible. "Everybody," said our host, "this is my son." It had been a hot day of hard graft, taking deliveries and storing them around the warehouse. I removed my flat cap and wiped away the sweat from my face. The wooden crate was already set down on the platform of the hydraulic freight elevator when I came to haul it upstairs. "Ready when you are, ladies," I said to the crew when I got on the platform. I thought I heard something from inside the crate, but it wasn't unusual for goods to be damaged in transit and roll around inside the containers. Not a mess for us to tidy up. The platform started to rise, and I braced for the unsteady ascent. We were halfway up when I undoubtedly heard a thump from inside the crate. With another thump, the strongest so far, the platform began to shake. Whatever was inside it was alive and wanted out. I was about to call down to the crew that the cables wouldn't hold us for long, but the cables failed and we fell. The screams came from everywhere. My first thought was that the screams were for me, that I'd been crippled in an epic industrial accident. Then I saw the apprentice's mangled body partially under the platform. I rolled to my feet and started to get my bearings when the crate burst open and a scaly humanoid creature ran across the warehouse. It growled as it covered the ground towards the exit. It swung a clawed mitt across the throat of a workman who stood between it and its way out. Then it was outside, loose on the streets of Vileshire. It was my turn to keep watch. I relieved my colleague from his shift and sipped my flask. The whiskey warmed my belly on that winter night. The wooden cabin in the woods was sufficiently isolated to hold the prisoner without anyone overhearing him cry in pain from our interrogation. But on that night, I was tormented by an unknown force. The sound of someone walking through the woods was unmistakable. The rustle of leaves, the snapping of twigs. Wind came sharp when I stepped outside, and I buttoned my jacket up to the neck. I directed the storm lantern towards the surrounding trees, though nothing stood out. As I made my way back inside, the undeniable sound of movement started again. Wind whistled around the cabin. I couldn't decide if the twigs were crunching under the feet of a single culprit or multiple assailants. My mind launched into frightful fancies of something up in the canopy, breaking branches as it circled me. "Who's there?" I stuttered, withdrawing my baton. A verbal reply was not forthcoming, but the woodland disturbances continued. It was at that point when I heard the laugh. Slow in the beginning, calculated. As the intensity grew, I realised the laugh was issued by the prisoner. "Shut up," I called over my shoulder. "Looks like this will be your last watch." I backed into the cabin, careful not to turn my back on the woods. When I unlocked the room to warn him, he was gone. A gaping hole of splintered wood had opened in the wall, covered in foliage. Before I lost consciousness, roots and vines slithered back into the woods. "We've taken the factory," roared the leader of the men from his elevated position. This was followed by a cheer from hundreds of workers standing on the factory floor. "For too long, we have worked all day in conditions not fit for the living," he continued. The crowd nodded and cheered their approval. "For too long, we have been worked into the grave. Our union will tolerate this no longer. It ends today." Another triumphant cheer bounced off the factory walls and around the machinery that had claimed so many lives. It echoed to the very top of the high ceilings and back again. Above the leader was a steel landing that overlooked the factory, a spot where those we protest against could observe their workforce. On the landing were several boxes, stacked carelessly. Amidst the cheering, one of the boxes had fallen, clattering on the steel. The men didn't care about damage to the factory. They were there to effect change, and damage was all but guaranteed. What the men didn't know was the contents of the box that had fallen. The thick, dark green liquid within had a matte effect that made it look dry. It also had a dull, pulsating glow. A pasty blob dripped through the gap in the landing and streaked down the leader's face and neck. He screamed in pain and wiped it away. He screamed again, looking at his hands. The men noticed the skin on his hand and face bubbling and turning red. Hundreds of the workers abandoned their leader and fled the factory.
Big thank you to AB Frank for this week's Flash Fiction. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain, and this is Bert Honour with Prepare the Pipe.
A moistened mattress from a fever dream, unbridled panic, your dirty drama queen. A blood-red sunrise reflects off an old guitar. You can run all you want to, but you won't get far. A tortured poet, creative cocaine fiend, runs his yellowed fingers through 90s magazines. His tinted glasses disguise his absent gaze. There's no sense in rushing, he'll be for days. Prepare the pipes and we'll be fine. Numb in body and numb in mind. In your mind, in your mind. Prepare the pipes and we'll be fine. Numb in body and numb in mind. In your mind, in your mind. Finely balanced by a spoiled surprise. No, she can't be trusted, those shifty angel eyes. A backstreet banger or a future queen. To those dirtied masses, once washed but never clean. The eyes are rolling as you rot inside. No, I can't console you, but I'm by your side. You never listened to your own advice. If it nearly kills you, well then don't try it twice. Prepare the pipes and we'll be fine. Numb in body and numb in mind. In your mind, in your mind. Prepare the pipes and we'll be fine. Numb in body and numb in mind. In your mind, in your mind. You're chemically owned. You can't sit up on your own. You can barely disaster. Prepare the pipes, turn out the lights. Just for tonight, for the disaster. Prepare the pipes, turn out the lights. Just for tonight, for the disaster. Prepare the pipes, turn out the lights. Just for tonight, for the disaster. Too high. Prepare the pipes, turn out the lights. Just for tonight, for the disaster. Too Do you like good music? That sweet soul of music. As long as it's swinging. Oh yeah, oh yeah. We're out here on the floor, y'all. Going to a go-go. We're dancing to the music. Oh yeah, spotlight on low roll, y'all. I know they look lost, y'all. Singing loves a honey thing now. Oh yeah, spotlight on Sam and Dane now. I know they look great now. Singing hold on, I'm coming. Oh yeah, spotlight on wheels are bigger now. That wicked piggy now. Singing Mustangs out there. Oh yeah, spotlight on board is ready now. Singing fine, 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 fine. Singing fine, 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 fine. Oh yeah, Woo! Spotlight on James Brown now. He's the king of them all, y'all. He's the king of them all, y'all. Oh yeah. Do you like good music? That sweet soul music. As long as it's swinging. Oh yeah. Woo!
That was Sweet Soul Music by Straight 8, and before that we had Prepare the Pipes by Bert Honor. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be joined by this week's guest, who is author Matt Koff. So the first question is a tradition. It's one that I ask everybody, and I'm sure you're going to have a great answer to this one. It's what was the last book that you read, and what did you think of it?
I'm currently reading a short story anthology of noir short stories that has been edited by Otto Penzler and James Leotoil. And it's been really fantastic. I write in that genre a little bit. I skirt the edges of it. And so reading these 25 or 30 short stories in this 800-page tome has been, really exciting for me to see different styles and things like that. So that's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. And what's that called?
Noir detective stories of the 20th century, maybe something like that.
Something like that, yeah. Cool, awesome. Cool. So obviously today I want to mostly talk to you about your writing. I wanted to know how long have you been writing and how did you get your start?
I've actually been writing most of my life. I wrote my first historical novel right out of college back in 1990, and it was on the Cuban Revolution and Fidel Castro. And I realized several things at the conclusion of it. One was I was not a very good writer. Two was I needed to do a lot more research on Cuba, including visit Cuba. So in 2016, I finally got a chance to visit Cuba, came back, did some heavy editing on it, and that's what I submitted to Encircle Publications, and they agreed to publish that in March of 2020. So I'd written a couple other things in the meantime out there that had not got published, and I was able to bring them along to Encircle as well and get them published after some heavy editing. So it took me, 30 years of polishing my craft and visiting Cuba and things like that to actually get a book out there in print.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, and you mentioned Encircle, and I wondered, like, what's it been like to work with Encircle Publications?
I've enjoyed working with them very much. I mean, they have their foibles, being a small publisher, they struggle for money and don't have much of a marketing or promotional campaign, but the pluses far outweigh it. I'm able to have input onto my cover design. I'm able to brainstorm with marketing and promotional ideas with them, and different things like that. I have a lot of input into what gets produced of my work. And as well, I've met a, fine cast of characters who are also Encircle published authors that has become like a family to me.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think it does have that vibe. And I mean, so Encircle, they're published in or they're based in Maine, right? And your Maine is like obviously very important to your books. I wondered, how important is Maine as a location to your writing? Do you think it's almost a character in and of itself?
I think it is absolutely is a character. The setting does play a large role. Maine is a very unique place in the northeast of the United States, and our winters are very fierce and uh, take action, part over into some of my books and things like that. So that's been valuable, as well as the attitude of Mainers, which I think is sort of much more towards, the attitude of England and Scotland than a lot of the rest of the United States of America. So I often think that Maine would fit in over there in the UK a little bit better, but absolutely, I think it plays a large part in my books.
Awesome. And I mean, I suppose the same is true of Cuba as well, right?
That it's a large part of the book.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and a character in and of its own right. That I suppose again, when you traveled over there, it's like being able to meet your character.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I realized without having visited Cuba that the book just lacked sincerity. And,
Yeah.
amongst other things that I realized is, one of the big turning points in the Cuban Revolution and in my book was when Fidel Castro and 300 bearded revolutionaries defeated a standing army of 10,000 trained soldiers. And, that just seemed too fantastical to believe
Yeah.
until I went to Cuba and hiked up to their command post high in the Sierra Madres Mountains, and it was 100 degrees and incredibly humid, and I could barely breathe, and you couldn't see 3 feet in front of you. And I realized how prime it was for ambushes, and how, soldiers with heavy packs and things like that would really struggle with that terrain. So that was very helpful.
Awesome. Cool. So, and you mentioned just before we kicked off, you're gearing up for a new release, and it should be out the day that this interview airs as well. So, what can you tell us about this new release?
Yeah, this new release is mainly Wicked, which is the fifth book in my mainly mystery series starring Goff Langdon, who this is a little bit more of an amateur sleigh sort of thing. He is a professional PI, but he is also a mystery bookstore owner. And so Brunswick, Maine can't really sustain either one of those professions by themselves, but if he puts them together, he's able to make a living. And in this fifth book, Goff Langdon is hired to look for a missing man who answered a classified ad to buy a four-wheeler and has since disappeared. Along the way, another woman disappears who has gone to meet a online dating site person. And it's as he digs further into this, he discovers that there's a grotto or a group of missionaries from the Church of Satan who some 30 years ago had moved to the Brunswick area and then had been expelled from the Church of Satan for being a little too extreme and radical.
Mm-hmm.
So you can only imagine that they were pretty radical, but then they went underground for a long time. And it seems like perhaps they are resurfacing. And so Gough Langdon's sort of in a race against time to save this missing woman, and then things get even a little more personal for him a little way down the road.
Awesome, cool. And you've got a few different series out as well. So I mean, one of them, what can you tell us about the character? I think is it 8 Ballo or 8 Borlo? How would you pronounce them?
I go Ballo, but
Ballo.
Who's to say I'm right?
Yeah. No, well, that's how I went for it as well. So I'm going to say you are right.
Yeah. Recently, I decided to put my love of histories and mysteries together, and I wrote a historical PI mystery set in 1923 Brooklyn, and it is called Velma Gone Awry, and it's about a missing flapper woman of a rich German businessman who hires our hero 8 Ballo to find his missing daughter. 8 Ballo is an interesting story on himself. He gets his strange moniker because of the fact that he was the 8th child of Hungarian immigrant parents living in Brooklyn and Bushwick. And he had 4 older brothers and 3 older sisters. And his mother was so certain that he was going to be a girl to even the scales that she named him Margaret and did not have a male name ready when he was born a boy. And his father was out to sea at the time, so she merely wrote down the numeral 8 on the birth certificate, meaning to change that at a later date, but never got around to it. So therefore, we've got 8 Ballo, just the numeral 8 as his name.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a PI in 1923 Brooklyn. He has a colorful cast of friends. He's got the Black business entrepreneur friend Pearl Hill, the Jewish journalist for the Brooklyn Eagle, Martin Hoffman, and the Irish cop, Stephen McGee. And as he starts to look for this missing young lady, a flapper, he starts to cross paths with all these legendary figures of the time. So we run into Dorothy Parker and F. Scott Fitzgerald and his wife Zelda, who was quite interesting. And Coleman Hawkins, the jazz player, and Fletcher Smack Henderson and Mae West, and even get a cameo from Babe Ruth. So we had a lot of fun traversing the roaring 20s in Brooklyn and looking for Velma along with 8 Ballo.
Awesome, cool. And obviously that's very kind of steeped in history, and you have a bit of a background in history in general, right? I can't remember now, did you teach it or you studied it or something like that?
Yeah, no, I was a history major at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and it was actually a history teacher there that got me very excited to write about Fidel Castro. I was a Latin American history professor named Dale Graydon, and got me excited about the topic. And that's kind of was the origin of Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution. And then I owned some businesses for 10 years before going back and teaching junior high history to the 7th and 8th grade level. And all along the line, I have tried to make history exciting and not just be a series of dates and events and facts to remember, but kind of bring it to life. And that's the same sort of thing that I like to do in my historical fiction as well, is to bring it to life and leap it off the pages and give flesh to the bones of the skeleton of the people.
Yeah. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. I'm here in conversation with Matt Cost, and this is Simon Gregory with Call of Duty.
To school, but I worked my father's land. I'd never been 10 miles from our home, but after 15 summers I could ride and I could shoot, and I ventured to the county fair alone. The sergeant in the army tent had shillings on his drum, and his stories and the ale called to me. Before I knew it, I'd received my shilling and a gun, off to fight the French for my king and country. And it wasn't just the foe who saw us coming, as we marched in line with rifles in our hands, and slaughtered boys who looked like us but spoke another tongue, to decide which rich man got to rule the land. Rule the land. 2 centuries on, it's still the same. Everything's different, but nothing's changed. I wasn't good at school, and I couldn't find a job that required all the skills I'd learned at home. A life of watching movies, playing Xbox, flying drones doesn't fit you for a standard office clone. But I'd seen all the recruitment advertising, let us make you into all that you can be. And before I knew it, I'd received a buzz cut and a gun, and the rest is military history. History. We'd make friends to last a lifetime. They never said how long that life would be. And those of us who made it back were not the boys who left our homes to answer to the call of our duty. They promised we'd come back covered in glory, we'd be heroes and our country would be proud. But who has work for men who've seen too much and can't forget the things they've done, and blood spill on that foreign ground? And it wasn't just the foe who saw us coming, as we stood there with our papers in our hands. It wasn't in the desert or the field or in the trench, but on the home front where we took our final stand. It wasn't just the foe who saw us coming, as we stood there with our papers in our hands. It wasn't in the desert or the field or in the trench, but on the home front where we took our final stand. The final stand. Who rules the land? Who makes the choice? Who makes the profit? Who pays the price?
That was Call of Duty by Simon Gregory. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be rejoined in conversation now by author Matt Koss.
Cool, awesome. So you have another series as well. I don't know, is this one series, the Clay Wolf Port Essex series? Is that one series?
Yeah, that's another series. It starts off with Wolf Trap. I have 4 books in that series, and the 5th one is going to come out either the end of this year or early next year. And that is set in a fictional town in Maine. The first series, the Mainly Mystery series, is set in Brunswick, which is my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of fun to write about your hometown, but that comes with its idiosyncrasies as well and problems. And people want to know if this person was them or that, or businesses. So with, my Clay Wolf series, I created the town of Port Essex, which is loosely based on a coastal town in Maine called Boothbay Harbor. But I'm able to adjust it as ever I want. And it's sort of been a fun mission because I created this huge map of 4 feet by 4 feet on my wall of Port Essex. And every time I add a place or a road or something like that, I add it to the map. So over the last few years, that map has grown and become more intricate, more involved, and I've sort of created this entire town. This series is a little bit more professional. Clay Wolf is also a PI, but he's a former Boston homicide detective who's come back to his hometown to hang out the shingle. And so it's a little more towards the thriller line and a little more professional of a PI. And, we travel the gamut from heroin being smuggled through lobster traps to cults invading the town to genome editing happening in a secret laboratory. And so it's been quite exciting of a ride with a lot of things going on in Port Essex, Maine.
Yeah. Cool. And how do you keep everything straight with so many different series on the go? I mean, I guess having things like your map helps. I imagine you've got documents all over the place with notes and stuff, but how do you keep them separate in that sense, I suppose?
It's I have to be very careful for certain because you're a writer, but as there's really 3 main phases. There's the writing, the editing, and the marketing. And as of late, I've had 3 books coming out a year. And they're from 3 different series. So at any given point, I'm writing 1 book, I'm editing another book, and I'm promoting a 3rd. So I have actually caught myself, having Langdon do something when it should have been Clay Wolf doing something, or vice versa. And so you got to be a little careful on that and keep your mind straight on it. But I feel that outlining as I go helps and keeps me straight and narrow. So
cool, awesome. And one thing I wanted to ask you, do you think have there ever been any crossovers between your series, and if not, could it ever happen?
I have one small crossover in an anthology that Eccentric Circles did of short stories by their authors. I have a short story where in Port Essex, where Clay Wolf and Bailey Baker live, they are attending a mystery dinner party at a local bar. And Gough Langdon and his wife Shabal come out from Brunswick to this mystery dinner theater where a real murder takes place. And Langdon and Wolf and Bailey Baker and Shabal join forces to try and solve this. So that was kind of fun to overlap them and interact them. And I have no immediate plans to do a full-length book with both sets of detectives, but I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Okay. So just a few more questions. So one of them is, I think I read on your website that you're an award-winning author. I wondered if you could tell us what that award or those awards were.
The one award that I've won straight up is the Kopp's Featherling Award, which is, several steps below a Nobel Prize or anything like that. But it was an award for the I Am Cuba book. And that's the only one that I have won outright. I have been a runner-up for a Roan Award and a finalist for a Silver Falchion Award. My book, Mainly Power, was selected as the Maine Humanities Council Fiction Book of the Year in 2020, which isn't quite an award, but a recognition.
Very cool. Yeah, yeah.
So that's pretty much what I've been up for or have won.
Yeah. So far.
So far.
Cool. So just going back to series, because obviously we've talked about a few different series. What is it about series that draws you to writing them?
One thing that I really like is, you spend some time with a character, your protagonist, and, hopefully you like this person and, want to come back to them. And I've also, I don't really have the lone PI out there doing his or her own thing. He's that in both my series and my third series that has now begun, there is a colorful cast of characters that I enjoy as well and have fun with. So it's always nice to come back to the protagonist and these characters, as well as the familiar settings that I've created, whether in my hometown of Brunswick or in my fictional town of Port Essex or now in Brooklyn and the neighborhood of Bushwick. So coming back to those things is a lot of fun and allows me to continue growing along with the characters.
Yeah. Yep. And I think the same applies to readers as well. So again, when they stick with you through books 1 to 5 or whatever, they can watch you growing as an author, they can watch your characters growing, they can, almost grow alongside the characters. So I think that's really cool. Okay, a couple more. I wanted to ask you in terms of like the feedback and reviews and things like that you've had. Is there any particular feedback that you've received that really stands out, or a particular piece that made it all feel worthwhile?
I don't know that there's any particular thing, but there have been lots of reviews that I've really appreciated, and nothing that sticks out at mine at the moment, but often, somebody will really get it and will make maybe it's just a sentence or two in the review where you realize that they grasped it almost better than I myself did,
yeah.
and, understand the character and what's happening and what's going on and what it's all about. And those always, bring a smile to my face, and it's like, oh yeah, they get it. So
Yeah,
that's always fun.
cool. And so you have a chocolate lab and a basset hound. What are they called, and how do they help you with your writing, if at all?
My chocolate lab is named Dog with just a small D. And he is actually a character in my Mainly Mystery series. His predecessor was the Coffee Dog, who passed on a few years, 7 or 8 years back now, and he was the star of the first 2 Mainly Mysteries, and actually had the bookstore, which is a mystery bookstore, the Coffee Dog Bookshop, named after him. And now Dog has taken over and is the right hand canine or right paw canine of Gough Langdon and all of his searches and mysteries and investigations. So he's very involved. Whimsy is the Basset Hound, and much like I changed the name of Boothbay Harbor to Port Essex for my Clay Wolf series, I have put a Basset Hound in there, but I've changed the name from Whimsy to Flash just to protect the names of the innocent. But yeah. Flash does grace the pages of my Clay Wolf series as well.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. And last question, just want to end on. We've touched on this a little bit with your new release coming up, but what's next for you and where can people follow you to find out more?
As I said, my fifth book in my Mainly series is coming out August 9th, which is mainly Wicked. I've got the publisher has the fifth book in my Clay Wolf series, which is going to be called Pirate Trap, and was going to be a December release, but might get bumped to the early in the year. And the publisher also has my sequel to Velma Gone Awry, which is right now titled City Gone Askew, following 8 Bellow into 1924 Brooklyn. And I've written another standalone that I'm pondering what to do with. And I'm currently writing the sixth Mainly mystery, which is called Mainly Mayhem. So I'm kind of busy with all those projects. My website is easy enough, www.mattcost.net. And my email is similar, matthew-cost@comcast.net. So I'm pretty easy to find, either that or on Facebook or Instagram.
Big thank you to Matt Cost for joining me. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Humans Can't Reboot with I Do.
This is our wedding song, it's just for me. Others with the soulmates, but I have chosen thee. They said humans and clones could never be, but it's more than love, because you'll never leave.
That was Galaxy by John C. Buttigieg, and before that we had I Do by Humans Can't Reboot. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head over to the Oak Shed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
9 Inch Nails, The Downward Spiral. I decided to check this album out when I was thinking about doing one on Johnny Cash. Cash's last hit was a version of Hurt, a 9 Inch Nails song produced by Rick Rubin. I am very impressed that Rick Rubin recognised something in that song that I would have missed. It is probably the least noisy song on the album, but to me it does sound quite U2-ish. The music of 9 Inch Nails always seemed to me to be primarily the soundtrack to some very grim videos. It always surprised me that such an arty venture became so popular. The music is challenging. It seems to be a reaction against popular music. There has always been reactions against popular music that appealed to the depressed young. Music that certain kinds of adolescents in different eras would play in darkened rooms, when cheering themselves up was the last thing they wanted. In my day I turned to the clanking bell and churning distortion of Black Sabbath's first album. The post-punk generation had Joy Division and then goth. In the Simpsons episode called Homer Palooza, featuring Smashing Pumpkins, Bart says making teenagers depressed is like shooting fish in a barrel. 9 Inch Nails is a singer-songwriter keyboard player called Trent Reznor, who took the synth pop of Depeche Mode and Aha and twisted and distorted it. The drum machine became an industrial steam hammer and anvil chorus. The singing became a growl like Tom Waits' Junkyard period, only without the swing. 9 Inch Nails hammer into your head like a clockwork pile driver, without anything to wake you from the nightmare apart from a few very brief seconds of real piano that just serve to highlight the surrounding dark soundscape. The sheer variety of harsh musical textures and hammering rhythms keeps this from ever being too tedious, and the trick of matching challenging verses with catchy chanted choruses gives it an unlikely commercial appeal. There is the occasional sequenced synth line, which is never overplayed, and some effective squealing nasty lead guitar. There is little of my pet hate, which is that Pet Shop Boys sustained stringy pad that fills out electropop like an invasion of bees. However, the more I listen to it, the more conventional it all starts to sound. I even heard acoustic guitar, but perhaps my ear had just become accustomed to the gloom. The Downward Spiral, 9 Inch Nails.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to Matt Cost for being with this week's guest. Thank you to everyone whose music I've shared. Thank you to AB Frank for his entry into the Rhylight Zone. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Archer on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts, as well as the Wickham Sound Listen Again. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. It all helps. And you can email me here at the studio on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. I'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to leave you with one last tune. This is the incredible Maz Manzini with Carrot. I'll catch you next week.
2 days, slumming around for 2 days, kissing the ground. Where do you wanna go before you slip away? 3 days, supping the grog for 3 days, hanging around. Where do you wanna go before you slip away? Whoa, we miss you, Carrot. Whoa, won't you come back, Carrot? Whoa, we miss you, Carrot. Whoa, won't you come back, Carrot? "4 days, playing the harp for 4 days. They'll sing you a song about anything if you throw a coin his way. It's been 5 days since we saw him, 5 days
The streets are quiet, now we're all alone. He's gone and slipped away. Well, Gordon Carrot Lumsden was 44 when he died. His handmade coffin rolled right past as he burst to the other side. I bet he bowled into heaven with a smile and a London pride. Whoa, whoa, we miss you, Carrot.